The first sound was shoes. Small ones, patent leather, barely a size 11 in children's, slapping against polished marble at a full sprint. Fast, desperate. The kind of running that comes from recognition, not fear. Then the word, "Daddy!" It cracked the room open like a stone through a cathedral window. Every champagne flute froze mid-tilt. Every conversation stopped mid-syllable. 300 heads turned in the same direction at the same time, toward the child in the yellow dress tearing across the atrium of the Belworth Hotel, arms outstretched, face streaming with tears. The word bounced off vaulted ceilings, off limestone columns, off the crystal weight of chandeliers that had never heard anything louder than polite laughter. It cut through the fragrance of the room, through perfume and flowers and the particular scent of old money, and it landed on one man in a charcoal suit who hadn't moved, whose face had lost every shade of color. And then, silence. It was a heavy silence, the kind that falls when 300 people realize they're witnessing something private, something that was never meant to happen in public. That single word was about to uncover a 7-year deception, expose a billionaire's mother, and reunite a family that was never supposed to find each other again. Have you ever kept a secret so long it started to feel like the truth? Have you ever been so sure someone betrayed you that you never stopped to check? Welcome back to Mr. Harlan's Hearth Stories. Whether you're a first-time listener or part of the family, I'm glad you're here tonight. The hearth is getting warm this evening. I already see family joining from Texas and London. Where are you pulling up a chair from? Drop your city below. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed. You're going to need part 2 after this one. Tonight's story is about what happens when pride and love and deception collide, in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time. And by the end, you're going to have to decide. Who was right? Stay until the final part. The answer might not be what you expect. Now, let's rewind. 12 minutes earlier, Zuri Fontaine had no idea she was walking into the end of a 7-year lie. Manhattan evening, October warmth, the kind that tricks you into leaving your coat behind. The air carried that brief autumn sweetness, a breath between summer's weight and winter's teeth, and the city was golden with it. Zuri stood on the sidewalk outside the Belworth Hotel with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Inside it, 14 original watercolor illustrations, foxes learning to read, bears discovering libraries, a small owl who believed words could fly, each one painted after bedtime, after the dishes, after the day had taken everything it was going to take, each one proof that she could still make something beautiful out of borrowed hours. The job was a literacy benefit, contracted through a coordinator named Priya, who had been vague about the host organization but specific about the fee. Good money. Enough to cover 2 months of art supplies and half a tuition payment. And the best part, Soleil could come. Soleil. She stood beside her mother in a yellow dress. Always yellow, always the sun. 6 years old with her mother's stubborn mouth and her father's quiet, searching eyes, though she didn't know whose eyes they were. Her sketchbook was pressed against her chest like armor. She carried it everywhere. To school, to the grocery store, to the laundromat on Saturdays where she drew portraits of strangers while their clothes tumbled dry. "Mummy, is this where the books live?" Zuri smiled. "Some of them, the fancy ones." Soleil considered this. Then she tapped her collarbone with her index finger. 3 quick taps. Her thinking habit. The thing she did whenever she was working something out. She'd done it since she was a toddler. Zuri had never known where she picked it up. There was no one to tell her. "I think the books would rather live at our house," Soleil decided. "Our house has better snacks." Zuri laughed. A real one, the kind her daughter pulled from her without effort, and took her hand. "Come on, son girl, let's go see the fancy books." They pushed through the revolving door, and the city fell away behind them. The lobby of the Belworth Hotel hit the senses all at once. White lilies first, heavy and sweet, and then something warmer underneath. Cedar, maybe. or the particular musk of generational wealth. The floors were cream and dove-grey marble, polished to such a shine that Soleil stopped in her tracks and looked down at her own reflection. "Mummy, the floor has me in it. Don't scuff it." "Can I touch it?" "With your eyes, baby." Soleil crouched anyway, pressing one small palm flat against the stone, feeling its coolness. She looked up at the ceiling. 3 stories of open atrium, a chandelier the size of a compact car, light fracturing across every surface. And her mouth fell open the way mouths do when you're 6 years old and the world suddenly gets bigger than you expected. Zuri let her look. For a moment, she watched her daughter the way she always did, with a love so concentrated it sometimes frightened her. Then she straightened her portfolio, put her professional mask firmly in place, and guided Soleil toward the event registration. That's when she saw the easel, brushed gold. Standing just inside the entrance to the ballroom, a piece of cream cardstock rested on it, printed in calligraphy so precise it looked mechanical. "The Kensington Foundation welcomes you to the annual Children's Literacy Gala." Kensington. She didn't stumble, didn't gasp. Nothing so dramatic. What happened was quieter and worse. A hit to the sternum that came from the inside, as if her own ribs had flinched. Her lungs locked. Everything telescoped inward. The lobby, the flowers, the sound of her daughter's shoes on marble, all of it contracting to the vanishing point of 11 letters on a piece of cardstock. Kensington, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 7 years. Even forming it in her mind felt like swallowing glass. The syllables sharp, catching on everything they touched, drawing blood in places she thought had scarred over long ago. She had built her entire life. Every apartment, every school district, every phone number, every careful, deliberate choice about where to live and who to know, around a single design principle: never intersect with that name again. And now she was standing in its lobby. Soleil had her father's eyes. She just didn't know whose eyes they were. And Zuri had spent 7 years making sure it stayed that way. Not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Because the man attached to that name had thrown her away, had signed a document that reduced their marriage to a mistake and their love to a settlement, had sent his mother to deliver the killing blow because he couldn't be bothered to do it himself. That was the story Zuri carried. That was the truth she had built her world around. And right now, that truth was telling her one thing: leave, now. She didn't know it yet, but the trap had been set 7 years ago by the one person she thought had saved her. If you can already feel where this is heading, type fire in the comments. Her grip tightened on Soleil's hand. She turned toward the revolving door. The plan was simple, and it assembled itself in under 2 seconds. Walk out, hail a cab before the doorman could ask questions, call Priya from the sidewalk, explain later, or not at all. Forfeit the fee, forfeit the exposure. Whatever it cost less than staying. She was already calculating the route. 3 steps to the door, 6 seconds through the revolving glass, 15 seconds to the curb. And how to explain this to a 6-year-old who had been promised an evening of art and fancy books? She would think of something. She always thought of something. But Soleil had already seen the art wall. It was 30 feet away, just inside the ballroom entrance. A massive display of children's book illustrations from past beneficiaries. Bright, wild, painted worlds. Rabbits in libraries. Ships made of storybook pages. A sky full of letters raining down like confetti. It was exactly the kind of thing designed to stop a child in her tracks. And it worked. Soleil's eyes went wide. Her hand twisted free with that supernatural strength 6-year-olds possess when they've spotted something they need. A force that has nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with want. "Mommy, look!" And she was gone. Quick legs carrying her past the registration table, past waiters holding silver trays of champagne, past a woman in emerald earrings who stepped aside with a startled smile, straight into the event space, into the gala, into the room, whose name was mounted on a gold easel behind them. Zuri couldn't chase her without entering the ballroom, couldn't shout without drawing every eye in the lobby. And she couldn't, would not, under any circumstance, Leave without her daughter. She looked back at the revolving door, then forward, toward the sound of Soleil's delighted voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The name on the easel behind her. Her daughter ahead of her. No exit that didn't cost something. Zuri Fontaine was trapped. To understand why that single word shattered a billion-dollar empire, you have to see the moment it was first built, and the woman who destroyed it with 3 precise knocks on a kitchen door. They married young. Too young, people said. Though people always say that about love, they don't understand. She was 22, painting murals for a community center. Bright, sprawling things. Cityscapes where buildings grew like sunflowers, rivers that ran through open books, children with wings made of brushstrokes. She worked on scaffolding with paint in her hair, and music leaking from a cracked phone speaker propped against a bucket. She earned enough to cover rent most months and not quite enough the others. She didn't care. She was making the world look the way she believed it could. He was 26, building a software company out of a converted garage in Long Island City. 3 monitors, a folding table, a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks and cold pizza. No investors yet. No office. No business cards. Just a conviction so stubborn it bordered on delusion, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams no one else could read. People walked past that garage every day and saw nothing. Kaz saw a future. He just hadn't figured out how to make anyone else see it yet. They were both strivers, not polished, not connected, not the kind of people who end up in magazine profiles or foundation galas. They were hungry. They were real. And they found each other in the last place either of them expected, a fundraiser. Not the kind held in hotel ballrooms with gold easels and calligraphy invitations, the other kind. The scrappy kind, held in a church basement that smelled of lemon cleaner and old hymnals, with folding chairs that pinched your fingers and a donation table covered in a bedsheet someone had ironed that morning. Local artists had contributed work for a silent auction. Zuri had donated a small watercolor, a fox reading by candlelight, its tail curled around the spine of the book like a question mark. He bid on it, overpaid by $300. It was the most expensive conversation of his life. He just didn't know the real price wouldn't be paid for another 7 years. She found him after the auction, standing near the coffee station with a paper cup he hadn't touched. She told him, straight, no pretense, that the painting wasn't worth what he'd paid. He looked at her, then at the painting, then back at her. I know, he said. I just wanted a reason to talk to you. The first spark. His directness against her surprise. The way honesty, delivered without flinching, can feel less like a confession and more like a dare. She didn't blush, didn't look away. She held his gaze for a beat longer than comfortable and said, You could have just said hello. I could have, but then you wouldn't have walked over here. He was right, and she hated that he was right. And she liked that she hated it. What followed was the kind of falling that feels less like a choice and more like gravity. He listened to her, not the way men sometimes listen, half present, waiting for their turn to speak, but the way someone listens when they believe everything being said matters. She would talk about color theory at midnight, about the way cadmium yellow behaves differently on cold-pressed paper versus hot-pressed, about why she painted foxes instead of people, and he would sit across from her with his chin on his fist, asking questions that proved he'd heard every word she'd said the conversation before. He remembered. He retained. He treated her mind like something worth studying, and she challenged him, not gently. She wasn't gentle about things that mattered. When his pitch deck was weak, she told him. When his vision was unclear, she pushed until it sharpened. She made him better without making him smaller, and he knew the difference. He'd had people in his life who confused criticism with care, who tore things down and called it honesty. Zuri built him up by refusing to let him be less than what she could see in him. He wasn't polished yet. Garage office, ramen budget, a vision no one else believed in. She wasn't guarded yet. Open, brave, painting the world the way she wanted it to look rather than the way it was. They were both unfinished, and instead of pretending otherwise, they let each other watch the work in progress. The falling in love happened in the spaces between the big moments. Late phone calls that stretched past midnight, past 1, past the point where voices get soft and honest because exhaustion strips away everything performative. Her paint on his shirts, not because she was careless, but because she'd hug him straight from the easel, still wet-handed, and he never once pulled away. His half-finished code on her laptop screen because he'd come over to cook dinner and end up debugging at her kitchen table while she sketched beside him. Their elbows almost touching, a growing, quiet certainty that this was the person. Not perfect, not easy, but right, the way a key feels right in a lock, not because it's beautiful, but because it fits. 7 months from first meeting to I do. Fast by any standard. Her mother said it was reckless. His mother said nothing at all, which should have been its own warning. But some things don't need more time. They need courage. And Zuri and Kaz had never been short on that. They thought they were building a future. They had no idea they were building a target. Before I tell you about the night that changed everything, and the woman who was watching from the shadows, I need you to do something. Hit subscribe right now. This story gets darker before it gets better, and part 2 drops next week. Subscribers get notified first. Don't let the algorithm decide if you see the ending. Like this video. Share it with someone who believes love is worth fighting for, because what's coming next will test that belief. Now, their wedding day. City Hall, a Tuesday afternoon in June. She wore a white sundress she'd bought off a clearance rack 2 days before. Cotton, not silk, with a hem that brushed just above her ankles. He wore a borrowed suit from a friend who was 2 inches shorter. The sleeves stopped well above his wrists. Neither of them cared. His hands shook when he held hers. Not a tremor, a vibration, like something inside him was running at a frequency only she could feel. His voice cracked on the vow, not the dramatic crack of a man performing emotion for an audience, but the quiet fracture of someone who means every syllable so completely that his body can't contain it. 7 people in attendance, no photographer, no flowers. The officiant mispronounced her last name, and Kaz corrected him before she could, softly, without embarrassment, as if the correct pronunciation of her name was simply a fact the world needed to get right. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, he pressed his forehead to hers. Warm afternoon light, the sound of the city below them, taxis, conversations, a distant siren, all of it irrelevant. He whispered, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning this." She whispered back, "You already have." That night, they couldn't get into the restaurant he'd booked. A place in Brooklyn. White tablecloths, a wine list longer than his bank statement. 2-hour wait. The hostess was apologetic, offering the bar, offering to call when a table opened. Kaz started to negotiate. Zuri laughed, grabbed his hand, pulled him toward the door, and then down the block toward a street cart on Atlantic Avenue. $3 lamb gyros. Standing on the sidewalk at 9 p.m., the city humming around them. Grease spotted her white sundress. His 2 short sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. Both of them grinning, the kind of grinning that makes strangers smile without knowing why. "Best meal of my life," she said. "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "Because you're stuck with me now." 7 years later, he still couldn't pass a street cart without stopping. He never told anyone why. He'd just buy whatever they were selling, eat it standing up, and throw the wrapper away without a word. His driver learned not to ask. Share this with the person who stayed with you when you only had $3 gyros and a dream. You know who they are. There were other details, the kind that don't make it into stories because they're too small to seem important, until they're the only things you remember. The ink stain on her left ring finger, for instance. Blue-black, permanent, embedded in the walls of her fingerprint from years of illustration work. India ink, the kind that doesn't wash out no matter how hard you scrub. It sat on her ring finger like a birthmark, and Kaz used to trace it with his thumb. Slow circles, almost absent-minded, the way someone might rub a worry stone or turn a coin between their fingers. He did it while they watched television, while they waited for coffee, While they lay in bed on Sunday mornings with the radiator clanking and the light coming in sideways through windows, they kept meaning to clean. He called it her real ring. Said the gold band was just decoration. The ink was the thing that proved she was an artist before she was anything else, and he loved her for that order of priority. The night before he left for San Francisco, a meeting with a potential investor, the first real one, the kind that could turn the garage into an office and the cold pizza into a company. She caught him doing it in bed, half asleep, his eyes closed, his breathing slow. But his thumb was moving, tracing that ink stain in the dark over and over, like a reflex his conscious mind had nothing to do with. Like his body was memorizing her even while he slept. And then there were the words, 2 of them, their phrase, their shorthand, their anchor in every storm that rolled through the small, ordinary life they were building together. Still here, when one of them was overwhelmed, when the rent was late and the freelance check hadn't cleared, when his pitch got rejected for the 14th time and he sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, staring at nothing. When her mother called with bad news or no news, or the kind of silence that carries its own weight. When one of them was scared or tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. 2 words, still here. He whispered it on the courthouse steps after the vow. She whispered it back across a dark bedroom on a night the power went out and neither of them could sleep. Just 2 words. But they carried everything. I see this. I feel it. I'm not going anywhere. Their life together was built on small, ordinary things made sacred by repetition. Cereal eaten at midnight on the kitchen counter because neither of them could sleep, and both of them were hungry. Reading her picture books aloud in ridiculous voices. He gave the fox a baritone, the owl a high-pitched British accent, while she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Slow dancing to a song playing from his phone because neither wanted to walk 12 steps to the living room where the speaker sat on the bookshelf. The kitchen table, the radiator, the walk-up apartment with thin walls and thinner insulation. They didn't need more. Not yet. What they had was enough. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. If you're still here for Zuri and Cass, if you're staying until the end of this story no matter what, type still here in the comments. Let me see my people. After she disappeared, Cass stopped saying those words to anyone. He didn't replace them. Didn't find new words to fill the space they left behind. He simply stopped. The phrase died with the marriage. Or rather, it went underground, buried in the same locked room where he kept the wedding photo and the memory of grease on a white sundress and the feel of an ink stain beneath his thumb. The words didn't fade. They fossilized, hardened into something too heavy to carry and too permanent to destroy. The love that Zuri and Kaz built was never fragile. That was the tragedy of it. It was strong enough to survive poverty and distance, and 14 rejected pitch decks, and a kitchen table that wobbled unless you folded a piece of cardboard under the short leg. It was strong enough to survive nearly anything. Nearly. Because before the silence came, there was a fight. A small fight. The kind that lasts 10 minutes and changes everything. Not because of what was said, but because of who was listening. And that fight, which lasted 10 minutes and was about nothing that mattered, was the exact crack someone needed to break everything apart. The fight happened the night before San Francisco. It wasn't about anything that mattered. Or rather, it was about the thing that always mattered between them, dressed up as something small. Groceries. That's what started it. A bag of groceries on the kitchen counter. Cass had left his credit card on the table that morning before heading to the garage. Not aggressively, not with a note. Just set it there, next to the salt shaker, face up, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd been doing it more often lately, leaving the card, paying the electric bill from his account before she could get to it, restocking the coffee without telling her. Small gestures he probably thought were invisible. They weren't. Zuri went to the corner market that afternoon and paid for everything with her own money. Illustration income. The check from a children's magazine that had published 3 of her fox drawings. Enough to cover rice, beans, vegetables, eggs, bread. Not enough for the olive oil she liked. Not enough for the good coffee. She bought the store brand of both and carried the bags home herself. When Kaz came back from the garage that evening, he saw the receipt on the counter next to his untouched credit card. He picked it up. Read the total. Set it down. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Zuri, the investor meeting is tomorrow. If this goes well, if it goes well, that's wonderful, but I'm not spending your money on our groceries. It's not my money. We're married. It's our money. It's your account, your name, your credit card. When I swipe it at a register, the receipt says Kensington. That's not my name on the card, Kaz. He pressed his forehead against the doorframe. She crossed her arms, both of them standing in the kitchen where they'd built every small sacred ritual they owned, standing in that space like strangers negotiating a treaty. I just want to take care of you, he said. I don't need to be taken care of. I need to be equal. The words landed between them, not loud, not cruel, but heavy. The kind of heavy that settles into the floor and stays. It wasn't really about groceries. They both knew that. It was about whether she was a partner or a dependent. Whether his money, which was growing now, the company gaining traction, the meetings getting bigger, was a bridge between them or a wall. Whether love, when it came with a credit card attached, could still feel like love, or whether it started to feel like a leash made of gold, beautiful and binding. 10 minutes. The whole fight lasted 10 minutes. No shouting, no doors slammed. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a question neither of them knew how to answer. No resolution. Have you ever had a fight that felt small in the moment, but left a mark that lasted? Drop a comment. I think more people relate to this than you'd expect. He left for San Francisco at 5 the next morning. The cab was waiting downstairs, engine running, exhaust rising into the early dark. He kissed her at the apartment door. She kissed him back. Both of them meaning it, both of them knowing something was still unfinished. A conversation paused, not ended. A bruise not yet visible, not anger. Something harder to name. The fear of being diminished by love. The terror that the person you chose might one day outgrow you, or worse, might carry you like luggage instead of walking beside you like an equal. And bruises, it turns out, are exactly what Genevieve Kensington looked for. The next morning, 3 precise knocks on the apartment door. Not the knock of a neighbor, not the hurried knock of a delivery driver. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, controlled, deliberate. The kind of knock that announces authority before the door even opens. Zuri was barefoot, coffee in hand, wearing one of Kaz's old t-shirts, the one with the faded university logo that she'd stolen so long ago it had become hers by default. She wasn't expecting anyone. She set down the mug and opened the door. The woman standing in the hallway was a study in precision. Camel coat, the kind that costs more than a month's rent and never wrinkles. Pearl earrings. Not costume, not statement, just fact. Hair pulled back so tightly it seemed like a decision rather than a style. A manila envelope in her left hand. An expression on her face that could have stopped a river mid-current. Nothing about this woman was accidental. Every detail, from the angle of her chin to the exact shade of her lipstick, had been chosen, measured, approved. She radiated the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself because it has never been questioned. Mrs. Kensington, the woman said. Yes. My name is Genevieve Kensington. I'm Caspian's mother. Zuri had never met her. In 7 months of courtship and marriage, Kaz had mentioned his mother in fragments. Controlled, distant, complicated. But Genevieve had never come to the wedding, never called, never acknowledged the marriage at all. She existed in Zuri's understanding as an absence, a shape defined by what it refused to fill. Now she was standing in the doorway, and the absence had a face. Genevieve didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped past Zuri the way someone steps into a room they already own, without hesitation, without asking. Her eyes moved across the apartment in a single sweep. The mismatched furniture, the watercolors drying on the windowsill, the wobbling kitchen table, the cereal bowls stacked in the open cabinet. She took it all in, and her expression didn't change. Not contempt exactly, something colder. Inventory. She placed the manila envelope on the kitchen counter. "I'll keep this brief," she said. "I respect your time, even if the circumstances are difficult." She opened the envelope and removed a single document. Typed, formal, the language precise and clinical. The kind of language that lives in law offices and boardrooms, language designed to close doors permanently while sounding reasonable. It was a letter. It said the marriage had been a mistake, that annulment proceedings were underway, that Zuri should vacate the apartment within 30 days, that a settlement of $2 million had been arranged as a gesture of goodwill. At the bottom, in dark ink, Caspian Kensington's signature. Each sentence was a blade, not wild or jagged, surgical. Every word selected for maximum efficiency, every clause constructed to leave no gap for argument, no room for hope. The document didn't read like anger. It read like accounting. A marriage reduced to a line item, a wife reduced to a liability, a love reduced to a settlement figure on a cashier's check. And then Genevieve placed the check on the counter. That counter, the same surface where they'd eaten cereal at midnight, where he'd read her picture books in voices that made her cry with laughter, where they'd leaned against each other, watching rain streak the window on Sunday mornings. That counter, their sacred ground, now holding a certified check for $2 million, a price tag on everything they'd built together. The cruelty of the location was deliberate. Genevieve hadn't chosen this stage by accident. She stood in the center of their home, the home she'd never visited, never acknowledged, never blessed with so much as a phone call, and she placed a dollar amount on the love that had been made there. "He didn't want to do this in person," Genevieve said. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "He asked me to handle it. He thought it would be easier this way." She paused. Let the words settle. "I think deep down you always knew this would come." The delivery was precise, controlled, and devastatingly kind. She wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening. She was stating facts, false facts, every one of them, with the weight of a woman who had never in her life been told she was wrong. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound like kindness, the ones delivered in a calm voice with steady hands by someone who looks you in the eye and never blinks. Zuri didn't speak, couldn't speak, because here is what Genevieve did not know. Here is the detail that would have changed everything if the woman in the camel coat had bothered to look, truly look, at the woman standing barefoot in front of her. Zuri was 3 weeks pregnant. She hadn't told Kaz yet. She'd bought a onesie the day before, tiny white cotton with a small sun embroidered on the chest, and hidden it in her sock drawer between a pair of winter socks she never wore. She'd been planning how to tell him, over dinner, at their counter, maybe with the onesie tucked inside one of her picture books, the one about the fox who finds a family. She'd imagined his face, the way his eyes would go wide, the way his hands would shake the way they shook at the courthouse. She had been carrying a secret made of joy, and now she was standing barefoot in her kitchen, holding a letter that said the man she loved had thrown her away. A letter bearing his signature, a check bearing his mother's fingerprints, and a future she would now carry alone. Zuri was holding a check for $2 million, but she was carrying something worth infinitely more, something that couldn't be bought, something Genevieve would never know existed. I need to stop here for a moment, because what you just heard, a woman standing in her own kitchen, 3 weeks pregnant, holding a letter she believes is from the man she loves, telling her it's over. That's the kind of moment that changes a life forever. And what comes next? What she decides to do with that letter, it will define the next 7 years. So if you're feeling this story, and I know you are, hit that subscribe button right now. Subscribers get notified first when part 2 drops. Don't let the algorithm bury the ending. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this tonight, because the next part will break your heart and make you question everything you think you know about pride, love, and forgiveness. The forgery worked, not because the document was flawless. It wasn't. The language was too formal for Kaz, too loyally, too clean. He would have misspelled something. He would have crossed out a line and rewritten it by hand, the way he always did when words mattered too much to get wrong. If Zuri had been thinking clearly, she might have noticed. If the ground beneath her hadn't just dissolved, she might have questioned it. But the fight made the forgery believable. The argument from the night before, 10 minutes about groceries and credit cards, and the question of whether love and money could coexist without one consuming the other, had left a bruise, not visible, not dramatic, but tender, and Genevieve pressed into exactly that spot. I just want to take care of you. If he thought her independence was a rejection of him, maybe he'd finally rejected her back. If his money was a bridge, maybe he'd decided it was a bridge to somewhere she couldn't follow. The letter confirmed the fear she already carried, that his world was expanding and hers wasn't. That one day he would look at their apartment and the wobbling table and the store-brand coffee and decide he deserved more than a woman who couldn't afford olive oil. The forgery didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to confirm the fear Zuri already carried, and it did. She could have called him, could have dialed the number she knew by heart and demanded an explanation from his own mouth. Could have said, "Is this true? Did you sign this? Do you know what your mother just did?" But Zuri Fontaine did not beg. Her mother raised her on that. A single, immovable principle passed down like an heirloom. A woman who chases a man who left her is a woman who's already lost. Right or wrong, kind or cruel, those words were stitched into Zuri's spine. They had kept her upright through things that would have flattened other people. They had given her dignity when dignity was the only currency she had. And on that morning, with a forged letter in one hand and the other resting on a stomach that held a future she'd carry alone, pride was the only armor left. So she wore it. She put it on the way soldiers put on whatever they have when the real armor is gone, knowing it won't stop everything but needing it to stop enough. She didn't call. She didn't verify. She took the check. Not because she wanted the money. The money made her sick, the zeros on it grotesque, an insult dressed as generosity. But disappearing costs more than people think. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, new phone, new number, new address, prenatal vitamins from a pharmacy where no one knew her name. A life rebuilt from zero requires capital, and pride, for all its strength, doesn't pay deposits. 2 suitcases, a disconnected phone number, a studio apartment in a part of the city where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own survival. She never looked back, not because there was nothing to look back to, but because looking back meant admitting she might have been wrong. And being wrong about Caspian was worse than being abandoned by him. If she was right, if he'd signed that letter, chosen his mother's world over their kitchen counter, then the wound was clean. Painful but clear. A cut she could stitch and scar and eventually stop feeling. But if she was wrong, if she'd walked away from a man who never betrayed her, taken his child into exile, and built 7 years of silence on a lie she never bothered to question, that wound would never close. That wound would mean she had done it to herself. So she chose the clean wound. She chose the version of the story where Caspian was the villain because that version let her survive. Let her raise a daughter. Let her paint foxes and bears and small owls after bedtime. Let her build a life that was small and careful and entirely her own. She chose the clean wound. It kept her in exile for 7 years. 7 years of raising a daughter alone, of painting at kitchen tables after bedtime, of stretching freelance checks across months that had too many days, of telling stories about a father who wasn't there, stories that were supposed to be warnings but always sounded like love. But here's what Zuri didn't know, here's what she couldn't have known, because the woman who stood in her kitchen that morning had made sure of it. The signature on that letter was a forgery. The check was real, but the reason behind it was a lie. And the man Zuri believed had thrown her away, he was 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward San Francisco, tracing the memory of an ink stain on his own thumb, thinking about how to apologize for a fight about groceries. He had no idea his mother was standing in his kitchen. He had no idea a letter existed. And the secret he never knew, the child growing inside the woman he loved, was about to rewrite everything. Caspian Kensington never signed that document, never drafted it, never asked his mother to deliver anything to anyone. He needs to be clear about this. Not for his sake, but for the story's sake. Because for the last 20 minutes, you've been living inside Zuri's version of events. Her truth, her certainty. And her certainty was built on a foundation that never existed. He didn't know. He came home from San Francisco on a Thursday evening. The investor meeting had gone well, better than well. For the first time, someone with real capital had looked at his whiteboard diagrams, his projections, his half-built prototype, and seen what he saw. The term sheet wasn't signed yet, but the conversation had shifted from if to when, and that shift was everything. He rode the cab from the airport with his knee bouncing and his phone in his hand, composing and deleting the same text to Zuri 4 times because he couldn't decide if he should lead with the good news or the apology. He wanted to do both. He wanted to walk through the door and say, "I'm sorry about the groceries and they want to fund us," in the same breath, and then he wanted to sit with her at the counter and eat cereal at midnight, the way they always did when something worth celebrating happened. He chose the apology first, typed it out, hit send. The message never delivered. He didn't notice. Not yet. The cab pulled up to their building and he took the stairs 2 at a time. 4 flights. The elevator had been broken since August, and unlocked the door expecting warmth, expecting the smell of her paints, expecting the sound of her humming off-key from the other room the way she did when she was deep in a piece. The apartment was silent, not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your eardrums and tells you something essential has been removed from a space. He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds before his mind caught up with what his body already knew. Her paints were gone from the windowsill. The 3 jars of pigment she kept in a row. Cadmium yellow, cerulean blue, burnt sienna. The ones she arranged by warmth because she said cold colors needed warm neighbors. Gone. The windowsill was bare except for a ring of dust where the jars had sat. Her coffee mug was missing from the dish rack, the oversized one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away because she'd bought it at a flea market the week they met. And it was, in her words, older than our love and therefore sacred. Gone. Her slippers, the grey ones with the worn-down heels that she kept beside the bed, always on the left side, always angled toward the door, as if ready to walk somewhere. Gone. He moved through the apartment like a man cataloguing a crime scene. Her sketchbooks, her shampoo from the bathroom shelf, the small print she'd hung above the couch, a woodcut of a fox standing in a field of stars that she'd traded another artist for at a street fair. All of it gone, but not everything. The wedding photo was still on the nightstand. Their faces, the courthouse steps, the borrowed suit and the white sundress. She'd left it face up, which meant she'd seen it, held it, decided, and set it back down. The half-used bottle of olive oil, the store brand she'd bought with her own money the day of the fight, sat on the kitchen shelf. The cereal bowls were stacked in the cabinet, 2 of them, side by side, exactly where they'd always been. She took herself. She left the marriage behind. Every object that belonged to them was still in place. Everything that belonged to her had vanished. The distinction was surgical, and it would haunt him for years. The idea that she had stood in this apartment, methodically separating herself from their shared life, deciding object by object what was hers and what was theirs, and then walking out with only what she came with, as if the marriage had been a room she'd visited, not a home she'd built. He called her. The number was dead. Not ringing, not going to voicemail, just the flat digital silence of a line that no longer exists. He called again, same result. He texted. The messages sat in his outbox, unsent, undelivered, tiny grey ghosts on a screen. By midnight, he was standing on the stoop of her mother's apartment. He'd only been there twice, once for a Sunday dinner that lasted 4 hours and ended with her mother teaching him to make cornbread from memory, and once to fix a leaking faucet that the landlord had ignored for 6 weeks. Both times her mother had looked at him with an expression that said, "I'm deciding about you." Not hostile, but watchful, measuring. Now her mother opened the door 3 inches. Chain still on. Eyes red. Face set like concrete. She said you broke her. She said not to let you in. I didn't. Please, I don't know what happened. I came home and everything was... She said not to let you in. The door closed. He stood on the stoop in the October dark, hands at his sides, and for the first time in his adult life, he had no plan, no next step, no variable he could control. He was a man who built systems, who mapped problems onto whiteboards and solved them through iteration and persistence. And now, the most important thing in his life had simply ceased to exist. And there was no diagram that could bring it back. He had the money to find anyone on earth, but he didn't know the person hiding her was pouring tea at his own dining table. He hired investigators, 3 different firms over 12 months. The first 2 searched for 8 weeks and 4 months respectively. Different methods, different resources, same result. Disconnected phone numbers, vacated apartments, dead ends, wrapped inside dead ends. The third firm was the most elite agency money could buy, the kind that finds people who don't want to be found. They delivered a final report after 4 months that said, in polished language, what the others had said: she doesn't want to be found. The frustration of it, having resources, having money, having the kind of wealth that solves most problems, and still coming up empty. Money can open doors that are locked. It can't open doors that have been removed from their frames. It can't find a person who has erased herself with the thoroughness of someone running from something she believes is real, or a person someone else is keeping hidden. Zuri's mother knew Kaz came looking. She never told Zuri, not once in 7 years. Why do you think she stayed quiet? Drop your theory below. I want to hear it. What Kaz didn't know, what he wouldn't learn for years, was that his mother was managing every thread, not from a distance, not passively, from inside his own house, at his own dining table, pouring tea from his own china. But while Caspian searched the world for his missing wife, the real predator was sitting at his own dining table. Because Genevieve Kensington didn't deliver a forged letter and walk away. That wasn't her nature. Genevieve didn't start things she wasn't prepared to finish. The letter was the opening move. What followed was a campaign, quiet, methodical, and total. She started with the first investigator, not by threatening him, not by doing anything so crude as bribery. She simply engaged him first. Before Kaz ever knew the firm existed, Genevieve had retained them for a separate family matter, a retainer, paid from a personal account that had no connection to her son. When Kaz later hired the same firm through his attorney, the investigator already had a conflict of interest he never disclosed. He conducted the search thoroughly enough to look legitimate and incompletely enough to guarantee failure. Leads that stopped one step before the answer. A map drawn with every road except the one that mattered. But that was only the first layer. Genevieve had Zuri's forwarding mail rerouted. A quiet arrangement with a postal contractor, not illegal exactly, but not something that would survive scrutiny. Any correspondence Zuri sent to the old apartment was intercepted, copied, and filed in a cabinet. Genevieve kept in a private office no one else had access to. Any correspondence sent to Zuri at addresses Genevieve had identified was delayed, redirected, or simply lost. The information didn't disappear. It was absorbed, pulled into Genevieve's control, visible to no one but her. And then there were the messages. Zuri tried to reach Kaz 3 times in the first year. 3 attempts, each one costing her something she couldn't afford to spend, because each attempt meant cracking open the door she'd sealed shut, and every crack let in a draft of hope that could demolish the cold, clean structure of certainty she'd built to survive. The first attempt, an email, sent 4 months after she left. Short, controlled, not angry, exhausted. I don't understand what happened. If any part of what we had was real, you owe me an explanation. She sent it to his personal address, the one he'd had since college, the one he'd given her the night they met because he said he didn't want to wait for her to find him. The email was intercepted and deleted before it reached his inbox. The second attempt, another email, 2 months later, shorter, more raw. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to tell me why. Intercepted, deleted, filed. The third attempt was a voicemail, left on a number she wasn't sure was still active. at 2 in the morning from a payphone outside a 24-hour pharmacy because she didn't want the call on her own phone records. Her voice, younger then, thinner, scraped down to the bone by 5 months of silence and solitude and the particular loneliness of carrying a child alone. "Cass, it's me. I'm pregnant. Please call me. I don't understand what's happening. Please just call me back." 23 seconds. That voicemail lasted 23 seconds. And it contained everything. The pregnancy, the confusion, the door she was holding open one final time before she closed it forever. That voicemail sat in digital darkness for 7 years. And when it finally surfaces, everything Genevieve built will collapse in 23 seconds. Kaz never heard it. The voicemail was captured, rerouted, and stored on a server that Genevieve controlled. He never knew it existed. He never knew she'd reached out at all. As far as Caspian Kensington understood, his wife had left without a word and maintained absolute silence. A silence so complete. It could only mean one thing. She didn't want him. Zuri thought Cass ignored her messages. Cass thought Zuri never sent any. Both of them trapped inside different versions of the same lie, both believing the other had chosen silence, both grieving a love they thought the other had abandoned. And then Genevieve visited Zuri's mother. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, sat in the living room on a chair she didn't lean back in, accepted tea she didn't drink, wore the same camel coat, the same pearl earrings, the same expression of controlled, gentle authority that she wore the way other women wore perfume. Not for decoration, but for effect. She told Zuri's mother that Cass had moved on, that the marriage was legally dissolved, that any attempt by Zuri to contact the Kensington family would trigger legal proceedings. Not against Zuri herself, but against her mother. Lease violations, tax discrepancies, the kind of bureaucratic threats that sound abstract to people who understand the legal system and absolutely terrifying to people who don't. Zuri's mother was not a wealthy woman. She was not a woman who had lawyers on retainer or accountants who could pass the difference between a real threat and an empty one. She was a woman who had raised a daughter alone, who worked 2 jobs, who kept her apartment clean and her bills paid, and her pride intact through relentless effort. And now a woman in a coat that cost more than her car was sitting in her living room, speaking in a voice that sounded reasonable and kind, telling her that the safest thing she could do for her daughter was to say nothing. She believed Genevieve, or she was too frightened not to. The result was the same. Every exit sealed, every bridge between Zuri and Cass demolished, every messenger silenced, every message erased. Genevieve didn't do this out of cruelty. That's what made her so dangerous. She did it out of love, a love so total, so possessive, so convinced of its own righteousness that it had curdled into something indistinguishable from control. She looked at her son, brilliant, driven, capable of building empires, and she saw Zuri as the weight that would drag him under. Not because Zuri was flawed, not because Zuri was unkind, but because Zuri made him soft. Zuri made him choose cereal over quarterly projections. Zuri made him trace ink stains instead of term sheets. Zuri made him human in ways that Genevieve believed greatness could not afford. She had watched her son come alive around his wife, and she didn't see happiness. She saw vulnerability. She saw a man who might choose a kitchen table over a boardroom, a walk-up apartment over a corner office, love over legacy. A man who might look at everything Genevieve had planned for him, the company, the foundation, the name, and say, "I don't want it. I have enough." And Genevieve Kensington did not raise her son to be small. Her logic was clean, airtight, monstrous. Love is a variable. Greatness is a certainty. Remove the variable and you secure the certainty. Protect the asset. Eliminate the risk. She thought in portfolio terms: diversification, risk mitigation, long-term yield. And Zuri, in Genevieve's calculus, was a high-risk position with no projected return. The terrifying thing about Genevieve was not that she was evil. It was that she believed, with the full force of her considerable intelligence, that she was the hero of this story, that she was the one making the hard choice, the one willing to do what needed to be done, so her son could become what he was meant to be. And the empire he built seemed to prove her right. His company went public 2 years after Zuri vanished. The IPO exceeded projections by 40%. His face appeared on the covers of magazines that had rejected his pitch emails 3 years earlier. His name became shorthand for a certain kind of success. Young, sharp, relentless. His foundation launched. His net worth crossed 9 figures, then 10. He built things, glass towers, investment platforms, a charitable infrastructure that put books in the hands of children who couldn't afford them. Genevieve looked at all of it, the empire, the influence, the legacy, and she believed, truly and deeply, that she had done the right thing. The proof was in the numbers. The son she had shaped into greatness was better off without the woman who made him soft. The math was clean. The returns were extraordinary. The cost was invisible, because the cost was a woman and a child that Genevieve had never seen and had trained herself never to think about. Now, I know some of you are furious right now. I can feel it through the screen. A mother who forged her son's signature, destroyed his marriage, hid a grandchild she didn't even know existed, and still believes she did the right thing. So let me ask you, was Genevieve protecting her son, or was she destroying him? Type protect or destroy in the comments. I want to know where you stand. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button. Part 2 is when the truth finally reaches Caspian. You don't want to miss that. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story. We're past the halfway mark, and I promise you, the reunion that's coming is worth every second you've invested. She was wrong, but she would never admit it. Not yet. Not until the cost stopped being invisible. Not until the cost walked into a gala in a yellow dress and screamed, "Daddy," across a room full of donors. Eventually, the searching stopped. Not because Kaz gave up. He didn't have that gear, didn't know how to quit a thing once he'd committed to it. The searching stopped because every door had been closed and every answer was the same. From investigators, from mutual acquaintances, from the silence itself. The same answer, repeated until it calcified into something he had no choice but to accept. She doesn't want you. 5 words. The most expensive 5 words in the English language. Because they cost him the last thing he was holding on to. Hope. And hope, it turns out, is not something you set down gently. It's something you carry until your arms give out, and then it falls, and the sound it makes when it hits the ground is the sound of a man deciding to become someone else. He didn't stop loving her. He stopped looking. And there is a difference between those two things. One is a choice, and the other is exhaustion. Kaz chose to stop looking because the alternative was to keep searching forever, to spend the rest of his life turning over stones in a field that had no end, chasing a woman who, as far as he knew, had looked at their life together and decided it wasn't enough. So he built. He worked. He turned grief into glass towers and stock portfolios and quarterly earnings calls, and a schedule so dense that there was no room left in any day for the question that lived underneath everything: why wasn't I enough? He became controlled, every variable measured, every outcome projected, every relationship held at a calculated distance, close enough to function, far enough to never wound him again. His COO had worked beside him for 5 years and had never been to his home. His board members knew his quarterly targets, but not his middle name. He dated occasionally, polished appropriate women who moved in the right circles and understood the implicit terms of engagement, and he ended every relationship at the 3-month mark, before it could settle in, before it could grow roots, before it could become the thing he'd lost. 3 months, that was his limit. The invisible line he drew around himself like a perimeter fence. Anyone who got close enough to matter got close enough to leave, and Caspian Kensington had used up his lifetime allowance of being left. There was one exception, one person who existed inside the perimeter: Oren, head of security, 6 years at Kaz's side. A quiet man, not silent, not cold, just economical with words in the way that people who've seen too much tend to be. He drove Kaz to meetings. He stood outside conference rooms. He managed the security detail at public events, and he was the closest thing Caspian Kensington had to a confidant, not because they shared secrets, but because Oren had earned the right to witness the ones Cas couldn't hide. He didn't know the full story of Zuri. Nobody did. But he knew the shape of it. The outline, the shadow it cast, the way it bent every room Cas walked into. He'd seen Cas sit in parked cars at 2 in the morning, engine off, staring through the windshield at nothing. He'd seen him stop at street carts and buy food he didn't eat. He'd seen him stand in the lobby of the Belworth Hotel before every annual gala and pause, just for a moment, just long enough for someone who was watching to notice, in front of the display where children's illustrations hung in bright painted rows. And he'd seen the tap, 3 taps on the collarbone, index finger, always 3, always the same rhythm, quick, light, almost unconscious, the way someone might tap a table while thinking. Except, Cas didn't do it while thinking. He did it while remembering. In parked cars, in quiet hallways, in the minutes before a board meeting when the room was empty and the lights were low and he thought no one was watching. 6 years Oren had observed that gesture. 6 years of a man's hand returning to the same spot on his own body, repeating a pattern he couldn't explain and didn't know he'd passed down to a daughter he'd never met. A father's signal sent into empty air, answered by no one, repeated anyway, like a frequency broadcast to a receiver that hadn't been built yet. Until tonight, Oren didn't ask questions. That's why Cas kept him close. Some people earn trust by knowing everything. Oren earned it by knowing exactly how much to ignore. But tonight, in a hotel atrium filled with crystal and champagne and 300 people who believed they knew Caspian Kensington, a 6-year-old girl in a yellow dress was about to answer that signal for the first time. And the controlled man, the man who hadn't made an unplanned move in half a decade, was about to come apart. He spent 7 years becoming untouchable, but he didn't know the person who could break him was about to walk through a hotel lobby carrying his eyes in a 6-year-old face. Now, 7 years later, the gala was in full swing. Crystal catching light, champagne catching hands, 300 people circulating through the atrium of the Belworth Hotel, their conversations blending into a single, continuous murmur of philanthropy and self-congratulation. The air was thick with expensive intentions, and the particular warmth that fills a room when wealth gathers to celebrate itself. Somewhere, a string quartet played something classical and inoffensive. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays, offering canapés that cost more per bite than some families spent on dinner. Caspian Kensington stood near the center of the room, mid-conversation with a silver-haired woman who ran a foundation of her own. Literacy programs in rural communities, something about mobile libraries and reading gardens. He was nodding at appropriate intervals. He was saying the right things. He was doing what he always did at these events, performing presence while his actual attention floated somewhere above the room, observing everything and connecting to nothing. She was saying something about metrics, outcome measurements, the importance of longitudinal studies in demonstrating impact. He didn't hear the next sentence. His eyes had caught movement near the entrance. A figure stepping through the archway from the hotel lobby. Emerald dress, natural hair. A posture he would have recognized from 1,000 feet away. Shoulders back, chin up, the carriage of a woman who had learned to take up space in rooms that tried to make her small. 7 years collapsed in a single breath. The woman in front of him was still talking. He didn't hear her, didn't see her. The room had narrowed to a single point. A face he had searched for across dead ends, and disconnected numbers, and investigator reports that all said the same thing. A face that had lived behind his eyelids every night for 7 years. Sometimes sharp, sometimes fading, but never fully gone. He didn't analyze, didn't calculate, didn't do any of the things the controlled version of himself would have done. The version that evaluated risk before taking steps, that considered angles before making moves. That version of Caspian Kensington had taken 5 years to construct, and it dissolved in less than 5 seconds. He crossed the room. We're back at the gala. The moment you've been waiting for. Type ready in the comments if you're still with me. Zuri's body recognized him before her mind caught up. She was scanning the crowd for Soleil, trying to locate the yellow dress among the black suits and cocktail gowns, when something in her peripheral vision snagged, a way of moving, a set of shoulders, the particular rhythm of a stride that 7 years and a fortune hadn't changed. Because some things are written into bone, and bone doesn't care about time or money. She'd spent 7 years training herself to spot him in any room. Not out of love, she told herself. Self-preservation. Know where the danger is, so you can move in the opposite direction. Know the shape of the wound so you can guard against reopening it. She'd studied his face in photographs, the ones that appeared in financial publications and charity announcements, the way a person studies a map of territory they never intend to enter, not to find him, to avoid him. And now he was walking toward her, and every exit strategy she'd ever rehearsed evaporated like rain on hot pavement. Her hand moved to the chain at her neck. Instinct. The gold links cool against her fingertips, the small weight of metal hanging beneath the fabric of her dress. She didn't pull it out. She didn't need to. She knew what was there. She'd worn it every day for 7 years. Not as love, she told herself. As a reminder, as proof of what trust costs when you give it to the wrong person. As armor against ever making the same mistake again. He stopped, 3 feet away. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Different now. Darker, woodier than the one he'd worn when they were married. Not the man she'd married. A different version. Harder edges. More expensive clothes. A jaw that had sharpened with age, the way stone sharpens with weather. But the same eyes. Those eyes hadn't changed. Still that particular shade of grey-green that shifted with the light. Still that quality of seeing. Not just looking, but seeing. That had made her feel visible in a way no one else ever had. 7 years and $1 billion empire, and he still had the eyes of the man who'd overpaid for a painting just to have a reason to talk to her. I looked for you. 3 words. Quiet. No accusation. No anger. Just fact. Delivered with the flatness of someone stating something so fundamental it didn't require emphasis. Don't. 1 word. A wall going up. Every brick she'd laid over 7 years compressing into a single syllable. Don't explain. Don't apologize. Don't pretend the last 7 years didn't happen. Don't stand there with those eyes and that voice and expect me to feel anything but the scar tissue you left behind. His gaze dropped to her neck, to the gold chain, to the small shape pressing against the fabric of her dress. A shape he recognized, because he'd put that shape on her finger 8 years ago in a courthouse with a borrowed suit and shaking hands. She tucked it beneath the emerald silk. Too late. He'd already seen it. You kept it. It reminds me what trust costs. The words came out sharper than she intended. The ring, his ring, their ring, pressed cold against her sternum. She wore it every day. She told herself it was a warning, proof that she had survived something that should have destroyed her. But standing here, 3 feet from the man who had supposedly thrown her away, she couldn't quite remember what the ring was supposed to prove. That he'd betrayed her, that love was a transaction, that she was right to run, or that she still, after everything, hadn't been able to take it off. His eyes moved past her shoulder, toward the art wall. She watched his focus shift, watched something cross his face that she couldn't immediately name. His body went still in a way that had nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with shock. The kind of stillness that comes before a wave breaks, when the water has already pulled back from the shore, but the crash hasn't happened yet. She turned to follow his gaze. Soleil was lying on her stomach on the gala floor, 20 feet away, sketchbook open beneath her, utterly absorbed in whatever she was drawing. Yellow dress pooling around her like petals someone had scattered. Complete focus. Complete oblivion to the crystal and the champagne and the 300 adults stepping carefully around her as if she were a small, bright obstacle they hadn't expected to encounter. And as Zuri watched, Soleil did the thing she always did when she was thinking. The small, unconscious gesture that had been part of her since she was old enough to reach her own collarbone. 3 taps. Index finger. Quick and light. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was barely audible above the string quartet, but to Kaz, standing 3 feet away, it was the loudest thing in the room. Zuri had seen the gesture 10,000 times, had never questioned where it came from, because where would it come from? Children develop habits. They pick up rhythms. They inherit nothing from fathers they've never met, or so she had always believed. But Cass was staring at that small hand on that small collarbone, as if he'd just watched someone sign his name in handwriting he'd never taught. The gesture landed in his body before his mind could process it. Something in his own blood, recognizing its pattern. A rhythm he'd carried for years without knowing its origin. A reflex he'd performed in parked cars and empty hallways and quiet moments when no one was watching. 3 taps, always 3. And now a child in a yellow dress, a child with his jawline and his stubborn mouth, was performing the same unconscious ritual. He wasn't thinking. He was feeling something that existed below language, below logic. A father's biology responding to its own signature in another body. Soleil looked up, directly at him, the way children look, without politeness, without social filter, without the adult instinct to pretend you weren't staring. She studied his face for 3 full seconds, her head tilted slightly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she spoke. "Mummy, that man has the same eyes as my picture." Zuri's face drained of color. Soleil reached into her sketchbook, the sketchbook she carried everywhere, the one pressed against her chest like armor, and pulled out a worn photograph, creased at the corners, soft from years of handling. A photograph Zuri recognized immediately because she had given it to her daughter 3 years ago, when Soleil started asking questions about the daddy in the stories. She'd had 2 copies. One she kept in a box beneath her bed, and one she gave to her daughter so that Soleil could carry the face of the man Zuri couldn't stop talking about, even when she was trying to stop. Cass, on the courthouse steps, borrowed suit, forehead pressed to a woman in a white sundress, grinning the way people grin when they've just done the bravest thing they've ever done, and it worked. Soleil held it up next to his face. The comparison was immediate. Same eyes, same jaw, same stubborn set to the mouth. 7 years older, yes. Harder around the edges, yes. But unmistakably, irrefutably the same face. Recognition crossed Soleil's face like sunrise. Slow, certain, unstoppable. A child connecting a photograph she'd traced every night with a living face standing 3 feet away. The photograph fell from her hand. Her sketchbook hit the marble floor with a sound that echoed across the atrium. And she ran. This is the moment from the very beginning of the story. But now you know everything behind it. If this just hit you different the second time, let me know in the comments. Small shoes on marble, patent leather slapping polished stone, the sound that had opened this story. The sound that had cracked the room open. Now playing again, but weighted with everything you know. A child who had traced this face in a photograph every night before sleep. Who had carried a father in her pocket, like a promise no one had made her. Who had asked when is he coming home and been told soon, baby, soon. Not because Zuri believed it, but because she couldn't bring herself to say never to a child who deserved better than never. Daddy! The word again. But this time, it carried everything. 6 years of bedtime stories. A worn photograph with soft edges. A mother who kept his face alive even as she believed he'd thrown them away. A child who had waited without knowing she was waiting, who had loved a face in a picture without knowing it could love her back. 6 years of silence ended with 2 words. But the explosion those words triggered, that was just beginning. She crashed into his legs, arms wrapped around his thighs. She looked up, tears streaming, his own eyes reflected back at him from a face he hadn't known existed 12 seconds ago. Daddy, quieter now. Not a shout, a confirmation, a word she'd been rehearsing her whole life for exactly this moment, whispering it to a photograph every night, and now, finally, impossibly, saying it to the real thing. Every head in the atrium turned. 300 people frozen mid-conversation, mid-sip, mid-step. Donors, journalists, foundation board members, waitstaff holding silver trays that had stopped moving. All of them watching a billionaire being claimed by a child no one knew existed. Watching the most disciplined man in the room come completely undone by a 6-year-old in a yellow dress. Kaz sank to one knee, polished marble beneath him, tailored charcoal wool pressed against cold stone. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the small face in front of him, the small hands gripping his lapels, the small voice that had just rewritten everything he thought he knew about his own life. His hand touched her cheek like she might dissolve, testing whether she was real, whether this moment was real. 6 years of not knowing she existed, and now she was here. Solid, warm, trembling slightly, looking up at him with complete trust because children trust the faces they've been taught to love. He couldn't speak, couldn't find words. The vocabulary for this moment didn't exist. The vocabulary for meeting your own child for the first time, 7 years late, on a marble floor, surrounded by people who would turn this into a headline by morning. And then he saw it, her small fingers resting on her collarbone. 3 taps, light and quick. The gesture Oren had watched him perform for 6 years without ever asking about it. The gesture he made in parked cars and quiet corridors, and every unguarded moment when he thought the world wasn't watching. His gesture, his rhythm, passed down through blood to a child he never knew he'd fathered, repeating itself in a body he'd never held until this moment. A billionaire on his knees in front of the whole room. One word from a 6-year-old did what 7 years of searching couldn't. If that image just hit you, type fire in the comments. Zuri crossed the distance in 4 steps, pulled Soleil tight against her body, her arms wrapping around the yellow dress like a shield. She doesn't know what she's saying. But Kaz was looking at Soleil's eyes, then at Zuri's, then at the ring on the chain that had slipped free during Zuri's movement, the gold band now catching light for everyone in the room to see. The wedding ring, the ring he'd placed on her finger in a courthouse with a cracked voice and shaking hands. The math was simple. The math was devastating. 6 years old, 9 months before that, 7 years since Zuri disappeared. The timing, the eyes, the gesture, the photograph in a child's sketchbook, traced so many times the edges had gone soft. She's mine. Not a question, a reckoning. Soleil looked up at Zuri, confused, certain. But he is my daddy, you said so. You showed me his face every night. The words landed in the silence of the atrium. Every person close enough to hear them heard them. The child's voice. Clear, high, completely without guile. Exposing a truth Zuri had kept even from herself. She had shown Soleil his face every night. She had told stories. Stories she called warnings. Stories she called lessons. But they were love stories. Every single one. She had kept his face alive for a daughter who deserved to know where she came from. She had traced his photograph. She had whispered when he comes home like a prayer she didn't believe in but couldn't stop saying. Zuri told Soleil a love story while telling herself it was a warning. And now her daughter had revealed what she'd been hiding from herself for 6 years. She never stopped believing he would come. Kaz's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. 3rd time. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen. 1 word, mother. Something cold moved through his chest. He answered, brief, clipped. 3 sentences. But Genevieve's voice came through the speaker too carefully controlled, too measured. The voice she used when she was positioning pieces on a board only she could see. Darling, I just wanted to check on the gala. How is attendance? Anyone unexpected tonight? She was asking who was there. She was asking if anyone had arrived who shouldn't have. The questions sounded casual, but Genevieve Kensington didn't ask casual questions. Every question was a probe. Every answer was data. Every conversation was a move in a game she'd been playing for 7 years. She knew. Somehow, she already knew. Someone at the gala had already made a call. A board member, a donor, a coordinator with divided loyalties. Someone had seen a billionaire on his knees in front of a child in a yellow dress, and within minutes, the information had found its way to the one person who had spent 7 years making sure this moment would never happen. and Genevieve Kensington was already moving. But while she was making calls across Manhattan, the real collision was happening in a side room overlooking Park Avenue, a room with leather chairs and tall windows, a room where a forged letter was about to see daylight for the first time in 7 years. He was about to show her a document she thought she knew by heart. He was about to prove her entire life was built on forgery. Kaz pulled Zuri into a side room before anyone else could speak. A small conference space off the main atrium, leather chairs, mahogany table, a window overlooking Park Avenue where the city glittered 40 floors below like something owned rather than lived in. The door closed behind them and the noise of the gala disappeared, replaced by the kind of silence that makes every word cost something. Soleil came with them. Zuri wouldn't let her out of sight, kept her daughter's hand gripped tight, kept that small body pressed against her hip. The yellow dress was wrinkled now, tear-stained, perfect. Soleil looked between her mother and the man who had just become real, her face cycling through emotions too big for a 6-year-old to name. The public scene had become private, but the stakes had only increased. Out there, 300 people had witnessed something that would become a headline by morning. In here, 2 people who had loved each other stood 3 feet apart with 7 years of silence between them and a child who didn't understand why either of them looked so broken. 7 years, Zuri. His voice was controlled, but barely. Controlled the way a dam is controlled, holding back something that would destroy everything downstream if it broke. You disappeared. You vanished. I came home and you were gone, and I spent a year of my life trying to find you. Why? She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she reached into the leather bag hanging from her shoulder, the portfolio that held her illustrations, her work, her reason for being at this gala in the first place, and pulled out a folded document. It was soft at the creases, worn thin from handling. The paper had the texture of something that had been touched too many times, folded and unfolded, and read and reread, until the words had worn grooves into the person holding it. She had carried this document for 7 years, in every apartment, in every bag, through every move and every relocation, and every night she'd lain awake, wondering if she'd made a mistake. She pressed it into his chest. Your signature, your words. Your mother handed me this and $2 million and told me you were done. Her voice cracked on the last word, then steadied with the force of 7 years of practice. I was 3 weeks pregnant and you erased me. So don't stand there and ask me why I left. I left because you told me to. The paper sat against his chest, held there by her palm, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he took it. He unfolded it slowly. Read the first paragraph. Read it again. His eyes moved down the page. The formal language, the legal phrasing, the clinical efficiency of a document designed to end a marriage with the precision of a surgical instrument. And then his eyes reached the bottom of the page, where a signature sat in dark ink. His signature, or rather, something that was meant to look like his signature, something close enough to fool a woman who had just been told her husband didn't want her anymore. Something close enough to confirm every fear she'd been carrying since the night before he left for San Francisco. His hands began to shake, not with rage, not yet, with horror, with the slow, devastating recognition of what had been done, of what had been stolen, of the 7 years that had been taken from him, and from her, and from the daughter standing between them, who didn't understand why her father's hands were shaking, or why her mother's eyes were wet. I didn't sign this. The words came out broken, fractured, the voice of a man whose entire understanding of his own history had just shifted beneath his feet. Zuri, I have never seen this document in my life. She stared at him. The words landed, but they didn't penetrate. 7 years of certainty don't evaporate in 30 seconds. 7 years of building a life around a story. The story of the husband who threw her away. Don't disappear because the husband says it isn't true. You're lying. I'm not. His voice rose, not at her, but at the magnitude of what had been stolen. At his mother. At the system that had kept this document hidden from him for 7 years while he searched and grieved and eventually stopped searching because every door had been closed. I didn't send her. I didn't write this. I came home from San Francisco and you were gone, and I thought you left me. I thought you decided I wasn't." He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the words that had lived in him for 7 years. "I thought you decided I wasn't enough." The intensity in the room had changed. His voice had grown louder. His body had tensed. His hands had clenched around the forged document like he wanted to tear it apart. And Soleil, small, sensitive Soleil, who had spent her whole life reading the emotional weather of every room she entered, stepped between them. She planted her small feet on the carpet, looked up at Kaz with an expression that belonged on a much older face, a face that had learned to protect the people it loved from things it didn't fully understand. "You're making her eyes look sad." Her voice was steady, certain, completely unafraid. "Don't do that." Kaz stopped. He looked at his daughter, this fierce, small person who had existed for 6 years without him, who had been raised by a woman he loved in a life he knew nothing about. This child who had just defended her mother against a man she barely knew but somehow already trusted. This girl who had his eyes and his gestures and his stubborn mouth and absolutely none of his hesitation. He knelt to her height, floor beneath his knees, expensive suit forgotten. "You're right. I'm sorry." A billionaire apologizing to a 6-year-old without hesitation, without defensiveness, without the pride that had cost so many people so much. Just a man, on his knees, looking at his daughter for the first time and choosing to let her be right. Something cracked open in Zuri. Not the walls. Not yet. But a fissure, a hairline fracture in the structure she'd spent 7 years building. Because the man she remembered, the man who overpaid for paintings and danced in kitchens and traced ink stains in his sleep, that man would have done exactly this, would have knelt without hesitation, would have apologized to anyone he'd hurt, no matter how small they were or how large he'd become. A 6-year-old just stepped between her parents to protect her mother from a man she's known for 5 minutes. That's the purest love in this story. If you felt that, hit subscribe right now. Part 2 drops next week. Subscribers get the notification first. Like this video. Share it with someone who stayed loyal when you had nothing. Because loyalty, that's what this story is really about. "What's your name?" Kaz asked it softly. The anger banked now. The intensity pulled back. "Just a question." Ask the way you ask a question when you already know the answer matters more than anything you've ever heard. "Soleil." She said it carefully, like she was teaching him something important. "It means sun. My mom picked it because she said I was the only light she had left." His throat worked. His eyes burned. He held himself together, barely, through an act of will that cost him more than any business negotiation ever had. This child had been named for light, named for the thing her mother needed to survive the darkness he hadn't known she was living in. "That's the most beautiful name I've ever heard." Soleil studied him, the way children study things they're trying to understand. "You look tired," she said. "Mama looks tired too, but she always smiles when she tells me about you." The revelation landed on Zuri like a spotlight, exposed. She had told stories, stories she called warnings, stories she called lessons, but they were love stories, every single one. She had kept his face alive for a daughter who deserved to know where she came from. She had traced his photograph. She had whispered when he comes home, like a prayer she didn't believe in, but couldn't stop saying. And in that moment, standing in a room that cost more than her apartment, watching a billionaire kneel before her daughter with tears he refused to let fall, Zuri heard the words she hadn't spoken in 7 years. Not out loud, not to anyone, but they were there, pressing against the walls she'd built. Still here. He was still here. After everything, after the silence and the searching and the grief, he'd turned into glass towers and controlled smiles. He was still here. 2 words that used to be their anchor. Now, they were the only thing left floating in wreckage neither of them understood. "If you didn't sign it," she said quietly, "then where were you?" "Looking for you." His voice broke on it. "For a year, your number was disconnected, your apartment was cleared, Your mother told me you left and didn't want to be found. Zuri went still. Her mother. Her mother, who had sat across from her at a dozen Sunday dinners in the years since, who had held Soleil as an infant, who had helped Zuri move into 3 different apartments. Her mother, who had never, not once, not in 7 years, mentioned that Kaz had come looking. The lie was bigger than Genevieve. It had roots she hadn't traced, rooms she hadn't entered, people she had trusted. Zuri's own mother kept this secret. 7 years. Was she protecting her daughter from more heartbreak, or was she just as dangerous as Genevieve? Type protect or snake in the comments. I want to see where you stand. I need to go. The words came out before Zuri could stop them, before she could process what she'd just learned. I can't do this here. She turned toward the door, toward the elevator, toward escape, because escape was the only skill she'd perfected in 7 years, the only tool she trusted when everything else failed. Kaz followed. I didn't send her. I didn't sign anything. I need you to hear me. Zuri stopped, turned, her eyes bright with something between fury and grief, 2 emotions that had lived so close together for so long, she couldn't separate them anymore. You had 7 years, Caspian. 7 years and $100 million. If you wanted to find us, you would have. The words hit him, because they were almost true. He had stopped looking. He had believed the story every investigator told him. She doesn't want you. And eventually he had let go, not of the love, never of the love, but of the search, of the hope. And almost true is the cruelest kind of lie, close enough to wound, far enough from accurate to be unfair. The elevator doors opened. Zuri stepped in, Soleil's hand gripped in hers. But Soleil pulled free, just for a second, just long enough to run back to the man who was watching them leave with something broken in his face. She pressed the worn photograph into his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his, warm, certain, unafraid. You can keep it. She looked up at him with his own eyes. I don't need it anymore. She paused, studied his face one more time. I found the real one. Then she took her mother's hand. The elevator doors closed on his face, not for the first time, but with far more weight than before, losing them all over again. Kaz returned to the atrium in a daze. The gala was still happening around him. Conversations, champagne, the careful performance of philanthropy, but none of it touched him. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, barely seeing the faces that turned toward him with questions in their eyes. Near the art wall, on the polished floor, he found what he was looking for. Soleil's sketchbook, the one she dropped when she ran, the one pressed against her chest like armor. He picked it up carefully, as if it might dissolve. He opened it. Pages of drawings, foxes, bears, small owls with oversized eyes. The world as seen by a 6-year-old with her mother's talent and her father's intensity. He turned the pages slowly, afraid of what he might find and unable to stop looking. Near the back, a drawing titled My Family. 3 stick figures, a mother with wild hair, a father with a square jaw, a girl in the middle holding both their hands. Underneath, in wobbly handwriting, when he comes home, he turned the photograph over. On the back, in Zuri's faded handwriting, ink that had been there for years, 5 words. So you know his face when he comes for us. She waited. She had waited for him. Every bedtime story, every traced photograph, every whispered when he comes home. She had kept his face alive because some part of her, the part she wouldn't admit to, the part she'd buried under pride and pain and survival, had never stopped believing he would find them. And he never came, because he never knew. Kaz sat on the gala floor, expensive suit on polished stone, holding a family drawn in crayon. Something in him broke open, not shattered, broke the way frozen ground breaks when spring finally arrives. Something that had been locked away for 7 years, something he had encased in glass towers and quarterly projections and 3-month relationships that ended before they could matter. That thing cracked open, and what came out was not rage, not grief, hope. Across the city, Zuri carried a sleeping Soleil to bed, yellow dress still on, small patent leather shoes still buckled, 3 small fingers resting on her collarbone, even in sleep. The gesture she'd inherited from a father she'd just met for the first time. Zuri whispered into the dark, "What if I was wrong?" The question hung in the air of the small apartment. No answer came. But the question itself was a door opening. The first door she'd allowed to open in 7 years. And 7 years ago, when Zuri whispered "still here" into the dark and got no answer, she thought the silence meant he'd forgotten. She didn't know the silence was built by someone else. Someone who was about to lose control of everything. What you're about to hear next will make you question everything you think you know about Zuri's mother. Don't skip ahead. You need to hear this. And somewhere, on a decommissioned server, in a data center, in a storage facility that Genevieve Kensington had forgotten she owned, a voicemail waited. 7 years old, never forwarded, never heard. A woman's voice, young, scared, full of desperate love. "Cass, it's me. I'm pregnant. Please call me. I don't understand what's happening. Please just call me back." He has never heard it. But servers have long memories. Data outlives the people who bury it. And lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually outlive the silence they were built to keep. The story isn't over. It's just beginning. The voicemail is out there. 23 seconds that will destroy a 7-year lie. Who finds it first? Caspian or Genevieve? Type Cass or Genevieve in the comments. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications. Part 2 goes live next week, and I want you in the front row when the truth finally plays. Drop your city one more time. Let me see where the Hearth family is tonight, and I'll see you in Part 2, when everything Genevieve built finally burns.